So I think the previous era was disadvantaged just because of the setup, just because of their commitments and their obligations. If we look at, I think the only fair way for me to look at this is look at maybe specific players and ask if they would walk into this side. So for me, I think that's the measure of.
Yeah, can we start? Sorry to jump in. I've been portraying this photo. This is like the originals, like the OGs now, Akina Max Muniafu. Maybe this is a good place to start.
Yeah.
With these guys.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, just looking at them, we've all encountered Max Muniafu. He's a massive specimen of a human being. I think he's about 6'3", 6'4", and to think that this was a guy with subtle rugby skills. And you see, that's the beauty of rugby from back in the day. It wasn't more about physique, but about brains. And this is a guy who had the ability to attack space, but also use his physique when locked up in a tight space. Then with him is the late Jimmy Owino. And Jimmy Owino, for his height and size, played as a center in 15s rugby for Mwamba and for Kenya. And I mean, these guys slightly taller than more tortoise size, and running at full pace. And this is preconditioning days. The days of even when you get injured, you remember there was something called water therapy, where shoulders popped and just pour water, strong. So
deep heat.
And deep heat and liniment, yeah. So, I mean, starting with these guys, I'm looking at these specimens. For me, for sure, Max Muniafu and Jimmy Owino, that walk into any squad even today.
Yeah, I mean, we're not denying that they're athletes. Again, they're athletes. They're just disadvantaged by, the environment that they were in, the resources that they were given. They would only there's when 2008, 2009. Kenya Shujaa would train 3 times a week or 2 times a week. I don't know. 2 times a week maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then there was club. Then Shujaa has to carve time, to
on Wednesday.
That 2 times a week or something like that. But then you realize that is no longer sustainable.
Yeah.
You guys can't compete because they go to a tournament and they can't compete with the guys who they're playing against. So again, a lack of resources.
So I
even when you watch old film, for example, when you watch the New Zealand of the 80s, for example, look at how those guys look. They're all tiny. They're all tiny. There's no big guys. But as time has passed, the game has evolved so much. We're now breeding athletes to play this game. These guys are so built that now the conversation is this safe anymore? Because of how big guys are and how fast they're running at each other, right? So
let's go off on a bit of a tangent with that, because I think you're disadvantaged because you didn't get to watch these guys up close and personal, where someone like Mike has been since the 80s. He's been watching these guys. It's like, okay, sorry. So since the 90s, you've been pushing.
It's all good. It's all good. It's all good.
You talk about the tour that went to Zim. So I remember reading about it. So I wasn't playing rugby at any level worth talking about, right? Damupevu, bottom of Damupevu is where I started my rugby. But I remember I used to religiously look at the standard in the nation, and so I'm good friends with Peter Ochola, Slide, Oscar Adoli. Those guys were a year ahead of me in Saints, but I was the guy who used to drive the Moti to the hang. I had a 1200 pickup. I used to carry 13 guys to the rave, then I dropped them home. So I used to hang with a Kina Slide, but I didn't play any rugby with them. So when I saw the newspaper saying, okay, tour to Zimbabwe, Oscar Adoli, Mark Holy, Mike Kwambo, Eric Omondi, Bill Odongo, and I was like, God damn, I know these guys. And then, and this is so weird because I remember we were on the hang one day and OC was telling me, Kibbs, I'm going to play for Kenya one day. And I was like, are you mad? Are you mad? Do you know who plays for Kenya? And 3 years later, This guy was a regular, like a 10 or 15. He could start for Kenya 10 or 15. So when I look at the talent from that squad and what progressed, and then the next generation after that, you look at guys like Lucas Onyango, Lavin, who was a mainstay in 15s and 7s for like 10 years, right? You look at Dennis Mwanja. And when Mwanja was coming up, I remember I never played 7s during, the circuit, but I was sitting next to Richard Omwela one day, and this is 2001, Mike. You remember when Ulinzi came back from conditioning, and those guys were just animals. It was him, and there was a guy called Shitote. Now, you probably don't know about Shitote, or maybe you've heard
I've
stories.
Heard his name. I've heard his name somewhere.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
This guy was like 6'2", built like a tank, and then he had a headgear that didn't fit his head. So the head was busting out of the headgear. And he just used to walk around like this. And that guy could run. And this was what Ulinzi was. And I remember, like, Omwela was like, who are these guys? I said, oh, that's Mwanja and that's Shitote. That's Mwanja the Iron Man. And then the next year, he was grafted into that team. And having played with Mwanja and watched him over the seasons, there's no one who can tell me that guy cannot walk into this Kenya 7 side today. In fact, I don't think anybody will dispute that guy would not walk.
Kibu, I have a question for you.
Fire.
In your opinion,
yes,
when you look at all the players of all time that we've had in the 7th setup so far, in your opinion, who is the best player that we've had of all this time? Just give me one. I just want one.
For me, Oscar Ouma.
Okay. Kwambo.
Lavin Asego.
Okay. Let me give you mine. Then we can all start giving reasons why.
Okay.
The best player that we've had in all the generations. Mike, how many generations did we list? Let me refer to your tweet sheet again.
There's 6.
There's only about 3 players who have spanned through the breakthrough era, the golden generation, and the modern era. And there's only one who has existed in all those generations and decided to quit at will. And that is Collins Injera. Now, the reason I say that Collins Injera is the best, look at all he achieved, first of all. Second highest top try scorer. When this guy broke into the team, he was just scoring, and he was the regular Kenyan athlete on the wing. Give him the ball, he will run, he will score, right?
Yeah.
As the game evolved, as we moved into conditioning, into size, into all that, into a more data-driven space, Collins Injera is the only player, I dare say, who adapted and shape-shifted with a changing time. Regardless, there was other players who were. Oscar Ouma was a great player. During the same time, Andrew Amonde, legend. But there's one player who stood through all those generations to be counted. And when his time came, he said, "You know what? I'm tired. I want to retire now." But
he could have kept playing for sure.
Yes, he could have kept playing. If Collins wanted to be playing this past season, he would have been playing. Because he's still playing with legends, and he's. Oh yeah, have you seen him play for the legends?
I haven't. I can't question. I know. I've seen videos of him like drinking whiskey, and he still looks fit. He still looks like he can push.
For the Wazir, you'll ask yourself questions. Why is he playing for the Wazir, right?
Yeah.
Now, again, the reasons as to why I'm saying all this is he's gone through all the changes in coaches, all the changes in what the Sevens game is shaping into, and he adapted. Constantly challenged himself to move with the times and adapt. Now, the question that we're having at this time is, if you say you bring someone from before 2004, they would have had a really hard time adapting to all the changes that have happened through all the years to finally fit into the team. But this guy shape-shifted. Every time there was a change, he was there. He was that constant in the team. He was shape-shifting.
Even when they forced him to play sweeper, which really didn't suit him. I remember that season. For me, that's what stood out for him.
That season was when I got my first call-up, actually. after that season. And I was watching, and you know what I told myself? Paul True is mad.
He's mad.
I told myself, Paul True is mad. Why is he taking our quickest guy and putting him at sweeper?
Yeah.
And Paul True gave me my first call-up. Then I went and I saw his coaching philosophy.
Yeah.
And that guy had this knack. He had this thing that he would explain the whys for everything. And that is where I realized that all the coaches I've had before in my life were not able to explain that why. And that is why I'd say it took longer for me to break through into teams and all that, because Kenya has really good players.
Yes.
But if you don't have someone who's explaining why you're doing things, then you don't understand the game until you get that person who will explain this. Now, the next person who tried to explain the whys after Paul True was Namkos. And now Bling is also explaining the whys. I've worked with Bling. I worked with Bling under Pau in 2018 when Bling was assistant coach. And these are data-driven guys. Bling has, worked with Crusaders. He knows his stuff. Okay. And that is the difference that coaching a different, that is the difference that an actual coach who understands what he's doing and has an actual philosophy that is data-driven can do in progressing the growth of a player. That's why a player like, look at all these kids who have been in the series this year.
Yeah.
They all look that they're not as, they can run, they're strong for their years. They're all young boys apart from Vincent and Tony, right?
Yeah.
Who are 28, 29.
Yeah.
But you can plug in a young guy, put him into the system. Look at Siketa. Jackson Siketa is 18, 19.
Yep.
Right? You can easily plug him in and the standards kind of will remain the same, right? Because now finally our players are at that point where we're not doing guesswork. The coach has actually explained why we're doing what we're doing. Gotcha. Right?
Yeah.
Now this started with Paul True, and I will justify this, but I'll let someone else take over, and you can get the drift based on the basis of what my argument that we started in the WhatsApp group came from. Yeah.
I totally concur because Paul True, when he came to KRU, was the kind of person who was not only a coach but was also like a mentor, a friend. The reason I say that is he came to the office and wanted to know what everybody does and how they're going to plug into Kenya Sevens, because basically he said, you guys are also part of the team, whether it's Judy doing the passports and everything, or me doing the media and stuff like that, or Mwanja sorting out the kit, you're all part of it. And I recall I was also making my breakthrough into like TV commentary around that time. And Paul True, because just naturally I'm somebody who's loved information and statistics. And like I recall telling him, like the composition of your squad right now, I'd say 80% of the players, first of all, hail from Western Kenya. And when I talk about Western Kenya, it's Rift Valley, Nyanza, Western Kenya, that entire catchment area. Not only genetically, but also in terms of the schools. And he said it's no surprise, because he said, like South Africa, the reason Saru is in Cape Town and Stellenbosch is because that is the rugby catchment area. So it's simple. If that's where the talent is, that's where you need to have more high performance talent identification programs around that side. It doesn't mean you neglect the rest of the country, but this is where we're going to get our athletes from. And he became very intrigued, and that's around the time, I think, Mots, you remember, you were still in Kenya that time. When he came, there was a bit of upheaval because of his coaching methods, and I recall there was a go slow, and the senior players were like, we can't deal with this guy. Paul True was like, what, there's players I'm going to deal with, and that's how he gave the likes of Bush Mwale his call-up, because he plugged them into the system. And I recall them playing at the Gold Coast Sevens that year, losing to Wales 21-17. They just needed to score an unconverted try and qualify for the cup quarters, but they didn't. But I recall 12 players who did travel all watching that game and realizing, you know what, this guy's gonna move on without us. And that was one of the things that, like, softened their stance towards him, and they returned to the setup, because he knew that with whatever it is he has, he can he can mold something, and gift Kenyan rugby a gem for years to come. Neil Powell did do nothing much for South Africa. Sorry to digress again.
Nope.
Neil Powell.
Yep.
Neil Powell was his captain. So it's very simple. When Paul True left, it was literally like a relay race. He just handed over the baton. Neil Powell changed nothing. Yep. It only started changing recently. I think after Neil Powell left is when they've struggled. But everybody has been in the system, because even for the Blitzboks and all the other teams below, the subsidiary teams, Paul True would take an interest even in Team D, where are you guys going and everything. So he'd always be blooding in one play or another, making sure that everybody understands the same setup. And that is now what is catching on with Kenyan rugby. And as Motari rightly puts it, we've got players who previously, somebody like Nigel Lamaita. Okay, when you see him up close, that's when you realize that he's quite big. But initially, when you're starting out, he's for let's use the common rugby phrase, looks windy, and the kind of guy you'd be like, no, this guy cannot be on this team. But of course, conditioning is a personal effort, right?
Yeah.
And he's bought into the programs that have been given to him, but he's also bought into the programs that have been given to him by the coach. You see, these are players who are understanding the whys, and these are players who also question. It's not like us guys who we were probably like recruits from Kiganjo, who were told, when you go, you run. I remember especially playing under Tank, carry the ball 1, 2, on the third contact, go down, so my forwards come clean it up, But now you're actually able to question and also give ideas. So that's where we're going in terms of coaching and the players.
100%, Mike. I agree with you, and I have a very funny conversation about that. You mentioned the Gold Coast tournament when it was 2014.
Yes.
Gold Coast. I was supposed to be at that tour. This was subsequent after Safari Sevens had played for Simba Saba, and I had a really good Safari Sevens. And Paul True came after one game. Actually, after the first day, he came and told Newton that he wanted me to move to Shujaa for day 2. And I told Newton I'm not moving to Shujaa. I started with my guys. I'm finishing with my guys, because I saw the pressure that was there.
Okay.
And it was a whole different setup, and I just couldn't move, not at that time. So I saved myself the pain, because the next day we were playing Shujaa actually, and we lost to them. So then, after the tournament, he actually approached me and told me, I want you to go to Gold Coast with us. He came up front and told me, he didn't talk to anyone else. He came to me and told me, I want you to go to Gold Coast. I've seen you play, you've had a great tournament. I think you will be a good addition to the team. At this time, I was in my final year of college. Strathmore. I had exams at the same time that Gold Coast was happening. Me with my UKC and my principals, I told him, I cannot sacrifice my exams and my scholarship just for a rugby tournament. If it's rugby, I'll play for you in more tournaments next year. I'll play for you. Just keep me in the environment. I'll play for you more tournaments next year. They went to Gold Coast, came back. I was in the training squad. Dubai SA that time. I went with Shujaa at that time was the second side, and we went and played CAR in Harare and lost to SA, emerging SA, something of that sort, in the final. At that time, now the main Sevens team was in Dubai, and then SA. Then Paul True resigned. Then after he resigned, that's how I got dropped from the setup again. So you can see this is nothing is changing. We've had this cycle of players being in the environment, being called up, being dropped. And when all those changes were happening, coaches coming and going again, there was players who remained in that setup. And this is why I arguably say of all the generations, again, Collins Injera, nobody will ever match that guy because he was there. And now when you see we're no longer, at the core setup now. So will we ever get another player who will put in the series for 10 years to develop and, keep morphing and learning the new things that are going on? I don't think so.
So I agree with you that Collins is absolutely special. He could play center. He was good enough to create. He had this electric searing pace. He could step off either leg. He is a once-in-a-generation player. I am maybe a bit biased because I love the way Ouma played. And for me, at one point in time, there wasn't a player on the circuit that could just touch that guy. Like peak Ouma for me was just a monster that just couldn't be contained offensively and defensively.
Oh yeah.
And so when I look at him and I think, what if Ouma? Because Ouma also went to Sri Lanka, right? And he played pro for like a couple of seasons. And he just came back and then he peaked again and then he disappeared off the scene. I think he had a wrangle of some sort with the union, I think over pay. There was a wrangle over pay. And I remember I was so mad because I'm like, this guy is absolutely amazing. Why can't the union just take care of their guys? And so I look at him and I look at this system now and I wonder, what would a guy like Ouma do under Bling's tutelage with the strength and conditioning? What would a guy like Oscar Osir, like an absolute terror from back in the day? He's not Injera, but like Oscar Osir was also an absolute menace. Mitro Chola, you've played under him. You probably played with him some, right?
I played with him some training games, yeah.
Yeah, and he was like peak Mitch, like early 2000s. Mike, you trained with him. I hear like training sessions. Our trainings, we used to say like the Queens and Impala training sessions were worse than games just because people were fighting for numbers, right? Like people would walk out black eyes and everything. Like guys would go at it, and so I just wonder, like somebody like you probably don't know Alan Wamanga because he's one of those guys who disappeared quietly. Quietly into the shadows, right? He was a year behind me in Saints. And I remember seeing him and Dombolo, Wilson Coco, they were both a year behind me in Saints. And then I saw them like years later and like these guys are rugby stars. Let me tell you, there was nobody who used to love doing up and unders and killing people like Wamanga. And he used to play as a forward. He's a fullback, he used to play as a forward in the game. I look at Wamanga and think, absolute specimen. If it wasn't for the knee injuries and the generation, he would have been a starter in that side. Mike, talk about Alalo.
Yeah, Alalo Olumesh. To put it in context, Mots, Alan Wamanga is Dennis Mwanja's build, physique, everything. But remember, he's a back. He's a full back. But away from the soft skills, he'll also tough it up, which he loved. By the way, he relished he loved the small battles. So he's a kind of player. You kick the ball into him, you think he's returning it to you. So he has a whole array of skills to pick from, the steps and everything. But if you want to get dirty, you will get dirty and you'll come off the worst. That was him. And like Mott says, like Kibui says, it's unfortunate that in that day and age, first of all, at club, we were training 2 times a week, Tuesday and Thursday. Yeah. National team, Monday, Wednesday. Friday was contentious, especially when clubs have games. Yeah. So, you had to split your time. So, the levels of conditioning were low.
And then Sunday morning.
Sunday
morning on the 21s. I heard of that.
Mike, Sunday morning. Yep.
Yeah.
January, February. Modes. January, February. You've played a Floodies game the night before. You panicked the whole night. Like I have salt. My hands are like white because of salt. And Habo and Musembi Mumu are making us run snakes. I'm telling you, like you wonder how your body survived doing 5 sessions a week, right? Yeah. Like it's untenable. But you look at the way they manage them. So body management is so important today. So that's something that they have that we just didn't have for generations.
Absolutely. And we talk about conditioning, also talk about things like diet, because for us, really, after training, you're heading into meals or something in Tao for fish and chips. Not fish and chips really, but chips kuku,
a quarter.
You're eating you're just basically you're eating to fight off hunger, not to build your body. So there's that. And then probably because the drinking culture was really strong then, it's nothing compared to today. Sorry, today is nothing compared to back then. And there was that. I mean, you finish training and you're like, let me go grab a beer when I'm waiting, maybe for a guy who's giving me a ride, especially if, say, like us guys, our folks retired, so they moved to north, huko Kawaskari, but so they're thinking, hey, who's going to Thika Road? Because by the time I jump, that's another 3 hours. So I'm like, let me check with this guy. So this guy is like, I'm saying the club is like, you do this, just go to the counter, I'm coming. You're from training, so basically you undo everything that you've done. So that was back then. So again, just looking at the specimens from back then, the likes of Alan Wamanga, that Alan Wamanga, Dennis Mwanja, those ones would walk into any squad right now. Imagine having a set of forwards of Wamanga, Mwanja, and Andrew Amonde, also Shitote, any given day. First up, they're 6'2" and above. And
Roger Akena.
Yeah.
Roger.
Even Max Muniafu, basically they're the same body structures as Max Muniafu, So,
sorry for cutting you short, Mike. I'm now thinking of when we brought kind of semi-professionalism to Kenya, and we had Shujaa training for 4 days in a week.